Hey, friends. Wow. The engagement, the excitement, the passion, the courage so many of you have shown as we have been praying, as we've been pressing in to pray for the hard places for America, but also for many of you coming from around the world for your country, but not just for those, for the hard areas that God's given you. Maybe it's your family, maybe it's your business, maybe it's your job, maybe it's a child, maybe it's a marriage. I don't know what it is, but if it matters to you, it matters to God. And it's so important that we grab a hold of that truth that I've said it multiple times, but we're not trying to get God to care. He cares way more than we do. But he wants us to know his heart. And so today I want to start addressing some issues. Now, many of you might have gone, wow, this is praying for America, but I'm not hearing much about America. Listen, America, like so many countries around the world, is facing deep darkness. Now, the good news is this is not news. And I don't mean this to belittle the difficult issues that people are facing, but the reality is there has never been a time when the issues we're facing today were not issues that were being faced in other ways and other times. And that should encourage us. That's not to belittle what we're facing, but it's to encourage us that God helped people in other times. He'll help us today. No matter who the leader of your country is, they're probably not as evil as Nebuchadnezzar was. Nebuchadnezzar oversaw the death and destruction and the utter violation of millions of people. He was horrific. He was evil. He was demonized. And yet God empowered 4 Hebrew youths to reach him and to transform an empire. Listen, at the end of his life, Nebuchadnezzar gave glory to God. He worshiped God. Guys, this is the thing. We, so often when we see evil, we see darkness, we react to it, right? We immediately go, rah! But you know what? You can't fight fire with fire. In Romans 12, Paul tells us, do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good, right? What does that mean? What does that mean? That means, listen, good is not good. Good is that which comes from God. It's not just, Hallmark cards and there, my friend. Good is the very power and great grace, the life of God being poured out on the earth. So what does that mean? So when you and I see darkness, many times we become very impressed with it, right? We become freaked out. We become fixated on it. We become overwhelmed by it. And what does that look like? That brings on fear, terror, darkness, despair, confusion, rage, anger. These are natural things, but they are, I would submit, they are simply indicators on the dashboard of life that are telling us we're living from this world, not from God. We're called to be in the world, but not of it. And that's a sign we're of it, right? We're a reaction to a lie produces a lie. A reaction to evil will produce evil, right? Evil, but what we're called to do is respond to God, to bring his heaven, that it may be on earth as it is in heaven. And so it doesn't matter what the situation, God's will is always that it be on earth as it is in heaven. Well, how would I know what God's will is? What is on heaven? Now, that's not to go into heaven and climb into heaven and take a documentation of what's in heaven. There's a much simpler way. I can go to God and I can hear his heart. And so when we're finding ourselves freaked out, I don't care what it is. It could be sexual brokenness. It could be radical injustice. It could be sickness. It could be a horrific war. God is still on the throne. God is still powerful, but he's looking for people to partner with him to bring his will to pass on earth. But as long as we stay impressed with reacting to darkness, we will continue to freak out, and we actually are empowering the evil one at that point rather. And so Many times I see we're being led in prayer. It's like, it's all about this emotional energy and rah, 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 and force, and but the reality is we do not war against flesh and blood, right? We're not warring against individuals. We partner with God. And it says, even though with powers and principalities, in Colossians 1, he tells us Jesus is over everything and we're seated with him, Ephesians 1 tells us. So what does that mean is that if you're facing something, if you're being overwhelmed by something, you're actually empowering it. And that moment of reaction will bring fear. And this is particularly true in America right now with many of the things it's facing, but it's also true in Ukraine and it's true in your country. If we're to partner with God, we can't be overwhelmed by evil. We have to overcome evil with good. So God, what is the good that you want to impart into this situation right now? What is the good that you want to invade this earth with? God, God, we talked about this the other day, right? All right, sexual brokenness. God, I'm freaked out by it. It really terrifies me. It looks really, really bad, but it's not more powerful than you. So God, what do you want me to know about this area that I'm looking at? Or it could be a horrific trauma that people have experienced. God, in human trafficking, God, what do you want me to know about it? You're not freaked out. Listen, do you know that Joseph and Daniel were both human trafficked? And yet God used them to transform the world. They were violated. They suffered great trauma. And yet God used them to change the world. We've got to come back to this fundamental understanding that we can't empower evil by glorifying it, by freaking out about it. I was thinking about, so often our prayers are so, Jesus said, do not Babylon like the pagans do, thinking they'll be heard by their many words, because your Father already knows what you want. He knows what you need. He's for you. So I was reminded of this funny this story. Alexander the Great was attempting, if I remember correctly, to besiege Tyre. He was trying to take Tyre, and he had a whole fleet ready to attack the city. He had hundreds of thousands of troops, and they were going to attack the city of Tyre. And a storm came up, and it destroyed his fleet. And he was so angry that he ordered the ocean whipped. He actually had all his soldiers stand at the shore and watch while they whipped the ocean. Many times our prayers are like that. We think by our energy, by the force of our emotion, we will be heard. But God heard us before we began to speak. We're not trying to convince God of anything. We're not wrestling with any principalities and powers. Those have been disempowered by God. But rather, we are coming before him and saying, God, what do you want me to know about this horrific situation, this issue, this problem in my family, my marriage, my child, Ukraine, the war, Russia, the economy, inflation, my job? What do you want me to know? And then, God, once I hear you, how can I tell I'm hearing you? Because when I agree with what he says, when I receive what he says, there is this peace that passes understanding, right? Peace that passes understanding is peace that is stupid in light of the storm. Jesus had peace that passes understanding. How do I know? He was asleep in the boat. The disciples were very much aware of the storm, and instead of it bringing them to God with joy, they're freaking out, they're shrieking, they're hollering, yelling. Jesus is asleep. When we come to God's understanding, we will have peace. Paul and Silas being beaten nigh unto death, being thrown into a pit that they might never get out of, that's full of disease and excrement in their open wounds. Guess what? They come to a place of peace. Why? Because their worship shakes heaven and earth. As we come into that place of peace, see, darkness. I'll come to this tomorrow. We'll talk there. I don't want to go on too long, but I want to say this. There's this fundamental understanding of what God's purposes are. What does peace look like? What does justice look like? Because that's what we get to bring. Blessed are the peacemakers, right? And we're going to bring peace and healing and hope and life into every situation. So we agree with God. We hear what he wants us to know, right? What do you want me to know about this? And then we grab a hold of that. What do you want me to do now? And as we just stay in that simple place, guess what? Many times he will say, I don't need you to do anything except agree with me, and we'll watch things shift. I want to share with you this story. Many of you guys know this story. Early on in Russia's invasion into Ukraine, we saw the Russian fleet sail right up to Odessa in the very first day and demand Odessa's surrender. They would not. And the Russian fleet, I think, tootled around for 2 or 3 days and then sailed away. But then I had friends, they were being bombed there in Odessa. They were down in the shelters with their families, and they're crying out. And it started because they were freaking out. And I got word that the fleet had left Crimea and was sailing, we knew, towards Odessa. And I knew they were going to attempt an amphibious assault. And I started to freak out. I started to lose my ever-loving mind. For my friends, and the Lord spoke to me. He said, Peter, you're not any good to them going down into the hole that they're in right now. You're not helping them. I was like, well, what do you want me to know? And God just whispered to me. He whispered to me this thing. He said, I'm okay. Ask me what I want to do. And I was like, okay, what do you want to do? And I heard this word divine wind. And in that moment, I remembered this story from, in the 13th, 14th centuries. Twice the Mongol horde attempted to invade Japan, and twice in this course of over 80 years, their fleets were absolutely destroyed by a tsunami, a kamikaze, a divine wind, a massive once in a century storm. And that it began to pray. And so I called y'all. Many of you were part of this. We began to pray for divine wind. I was like, Lord, what would that look like? And he said a wind would be so strong that the waters would be so rough that they would be unable to make an amphibious landing. For the next 13, 14 days, the winds never got less than 14 miles an hour, and they were unable to land. Boom, went away. Guys, this is what I'm talking about. When we hear from God, right? First of all, he's going to quiet the storm in us, and then we'll be able to hear him, what he wants to do, and we can agree with him. Was I in Ukraine? No. Were you? Maybe some of you were, but God is the one who brought the victory. He's just looking for people to partner with him and not be impressed with evil, not be impressed with darkness, not be impressed with the difficulties in the world, but to be impressed with God, to fear God and live. So hopefully this makes some sense. Again, we'll keep continuing this series. It's very important. I've mentioned before, the next 2 or 3 months in America, but throughout the world, are going to be some of the most critical, crucial times. And we must, as believers, be anchored and rooted in his kingdom, right? Bringing his kingdom from heaven to earth by partnering with him. We cannot be blown to and fro by every wave. We can't be double-minded. We have to have the mind of Christ and live from there. So we'll continue this series, and thank you guys so much for sharing this, for liking it, for commenting. It's making a difference. It's getting the word out. But more than that, it's helping to raise up prayer that changes things, because every one of us, we need to see America change. We need to see your country change. We need to see your family change. We need to see God's kingdom come. Have a wonderful day. We love you guys. Take care.